Global movements against the nuclear bomb began around the same time the bombs were dropped. From 1945, hundreds of thousands of people mobilised to join civil society groups, putting pressure on governments to police to never again use nuclear weapons. The idea of a world government was also born. While governments acknowledged public concern with arms control rhetoric, the Cold War brought about a nuclear arms race, exponentially increasing the number of nuclear weapons. The growing stockpiles of nuclear weapons around the world reinvigorated the movement to ban the bomb. Protests and petitions were seen around the globe, pushing for an end of the arms race and a ban on nuclear weapons. France, the Soviet Union, Britain, and the United States all recommended forms of nuclear weapons testing in the 1960s. Popular resistance to nuclear weapons grew after nuclear control negotiations failed globally. The Cuban Missile Crisis and the first Chinese nuclear weapons test galvanized the movements into the 60s. It was in the 1980s that the fear of mutually assured destruction caused mass populations around the globe to rise up in the streets against pro-nuclear leaders. It was Mikhail Gorbachev's rise to power in 1985 and his support of the anti-nuclear movements that convinced Ronald Reagan to break from the ideas of the past and move forward. The joint support from these two global powers of the time and the end of the Cold War helped give the movement international credence. From 1993 until now, the anti-nuclear campaign has been a worldwide popular movement, with public figures and world leaders consistently voicing their distaste for nuclear weapons. The global stage was set for ICANN.
ICANN began in Australia and was formally launched in Austria in April 2007. ICANN founders were inspired by the tremendous success of previous international campaigns to ban highly destructive modern weapons of war. ICANN started to gain traction on a global scale quickly. City mayors around the world, including, unsurprisingly, the mayor of Hiroshima, pledged their support for the movement. As it continued to gain traction, 10,000 people marched through the streets of Melbourne on April Fool's Day, highlighting the foolishness of relying on nuclear deterrence. ICANN was launched internationally, officially in Vienna at a Non-Proliferation Preparation Committee meeting. The United Nations started to get involved when former Weapons Inspector Hans Blix endorsed the campaign. Before long, it also stretched further internationally into Canada, Tibet, and India. In October 2008, UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon officially added his voice to the movement, highlighting the truly global scale. Further, it began to gain traction at the grassroots level. A poll in December 2008 showed that 76% of people interviewed supported negotiations towards banning nuclear weapons. Barack Obama, at that time the most powerful man in the world, chaired a special meeting of the United Nations Security Council and adopted a resolution calling for the worldwide elimination of nuclear weapons. 2 years later, and only 3 years after the 2008 public opinion poll, a petition was handed to the United Nations which consisted of 26 million signatures. While the movement continued to grow worldwide, ICANN itself also continued to grow. In 2010, ICANN opened up an international office in Norway, and that same year, New York saw an estimated 15,000 people taking part in the New York City Lighting Parade to support the ban on nuclear weapons. The Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon sent a message to support ICANN, saying, "This movement to abolish nuclear weapons is on the right side of history. We will continue to fight for this great cause." Not stopping there, in 2011, ICANN sent a challenging video group to the P5 nations, all of whom are nuclear powers, asking them to do more to improve transparency in nuclear relations. ICANN also launched a major study called Don't Bank on the Bomb, which detailed global investments in nuclear weapons companies. Campaigners put pressure on their financial institutions to end support for the nuclear arms industry. Over the next few years, ICANN continued to lead conferences and events all around the world. This included a variety of campaigning techniques, including releasing animations and children's books in Arabic, as well as supporting international coalitions in Latin America and the Pacific, all calling for a ban. Celebrity videos were also released, and civil society, which included church groups, met in solidarity to support the ban.
In March 2013, ICANN was one of 5 to provide an opening statement for the first ever intergovernmental conference on the impact of nuclear weapons in Oslo. With an attendance of 128 nations, ICANN seriously addressed the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons. Continuing the important discussions that were being held in Oslo, a second conference was held by the Mexican government in 2014. This conference saw an increase of attendance, with 146 nations in support of global nuclear disarmament. This conference aimed at introducing international standards on nuclear weapons. In the same year, a third conference was held in Vienna, and a document known as the Humanitarian Pledge was written. What came from these conferences was something extraordinary. 127 nations officially endorsed the document cooperating against nuclear weapons. ICANN used the 2015 anniversary of the atomic bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki to urge governments to take action on the pledge they had signed in the previous year. As a result of this push from ICANN, in August 2016, a special UN working group is created to discuss the legal necessities that would be required to achieve a world free of nuclear weapons. It was in this time that a treaty is first proposed between governments and powerful NGOs. The Red Cross described the treaty as having, quote, potentially historic implications, end quote. The UN General Assembly negotiations began on legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons, leading towards their total elimination. Finally, in July of 2017, after a decade of advocacy by ICANN and months of negotiations, an overpowering vote in favor of adopting a multilateral nuclear disarmament agreement was achieved. This multilateral agreement is known as the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons.
There are currently only 9 states that possess nuclear weapons. Out of these 9 states, the US is a leading power in this area. At the beginning of 2019, the US Department of Defense maintained an estimated stockpile of 3,800 nuclear warheads. Although nuclear anti-proliferation movements, organizations, and subsequent treaties such as ICANN and the NPT have created a massive amount of change, there is still much more work that needs to be done to ensure that nuclear weapons are totally stigmatized and delegitimized. Although ICANN have been doing tremendous work in dismantling nuclear weapons worldwide, the movement will not be nearly as successful unless states find an alternative means for security. As Kim Jong-un's administration said, history proves that powerful nuclear deterrence serves as the strongest treasured sword for frustrating outsiders' aggression. In foreign policy toolbox of states such as North Korea, Iran, and Pakistan, there is no other tool greater than nuclear weapons to enable protection against other states and uphold national security interests. ICANN still has a lot of work to do. Currently, only 26 states have ratified the Prohibition Treaty. Unless ICANN and other international anti-nuclear weapons movements can address the structural security concerns that exist around the world, nuclear weapons will be around for a very long time to come. However, it is imperative that the work of ICANN continues so that the 9 states that currently harbour nuclear weapons can realise the benefits of becoming a nuclear-free state so that the world can become a safer and more stable place for all.